Some North Carolina landlords are being forced to evict their tenants because the local housing authority refuses to pay them the Section 8 rent that they promised that they would pay. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. Alright, so I have an interesting article for you today, and once again, it is about the topic of Section 8, okay? Now, I told you, I used to participate in the Section 8 program. I used to have Section 8 rentals. I do not want Section 8 rentals anymore. I don't want to deal with the bureaucracy. I don't want to deal with the issues with the tenants. The whole thing is very messy. Now, I understand there's a place for Section 8, okay? There really is. In a few cases, I actually do agree with it. And I'm talking about people who are so physically disabled that they are unable to work, and if they do have a job, it is so minimal paying that they would be unable to pay for their rent. I also believe that maybe some people do need a helping hand to help them get back on their feet. What I don't believe in is that the Section 8 program should pay for 20 years for people to be able to live basically for free. Okay, 20 years plus. I mean, I've heard of cases where people have been on Section 8 for 30 years, longer. People who have turned down better paying jobs because they would lose their housing assistance. Okay, this is the sort of abuse that I don't want to see in the system. This is part of the reason why we should have limits on these programs. Okay, they're socialist programs, and I'm not 100% cold-hearted. Yeah, I believe there is a place for them, but they are very specific situations. And what I'm seeing is not those situations in a lot of cases, okay? So the bureaucracy is another issue. The bureaucracy is part of the reason why I got out of it. Actually, probably the majority of the reason, not even the tenants. So not only do you have to wait an extended period of time to get that first rent check, right? Where if you put a regular tenant up in the unit, you would get the money immediately. But then you also have to do lots of little, fix little stuff. Oh, you got to fix this, that, and that in order to pass that Section 8 inspection. And they re-inspect the property every year. And every year they will nitpick and find a whole bunch of garbage that you have to fix. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, is it worth jumping through all these hoops? And I actually went through a Section 8 eviction where the tenant, the little minuscule portion of the rent that they actually had to pay, they were unable to pay it. And so they were just slowly accumulating debt. And then you're just sitting there wondering, like, do I keep this tenant in there? Because the government's still paying me the majority of the rent. Maybe do I keep this tenant? Do I keep this tenant? And I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get them up out of there. So yeah, a lot of issues. And we're seeing that in this article as well. And this article it's coming out of North Carolina, so it's not a place that is not that is unfriendly to landlords. It's not, okay? North Carolina is known as being a pretty landlord-friendly place. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So are you surprised? Have you ever had issues with the bureaucracy or with Section 8 program as a whole? I know I've talked to a lot of landlords. I've read the comments from a lot of other landlords in my comment section who said they will never participate with Section 8 again. Well, tell us why, okay? Let the other people know the problems you had with the program and why you won't do it again, okay? Anyway, let me get into the article and tell you what it says. This article is coming from abc11.com, and it says, landlords owed thousands of dollars in Wake County. When will they get paid? Good question. Let's get into it. Where is the money? That is what some Wake County landlords continue to ask as they're waiting for months worth of rent payments from the Wake County Housing Authority. We first told you about this problem in May when some renters who received housing choice vouchers and live in Wake County found the landlord. Chris O'Shield says, now they owe us, for February, March, April, May, June, plus 5 months of late fees. So it's getting to be a pretty big dollar mark. O'Shield says the total amount he's owed from Wake County Housing Authority is more than $6,800. He adds, I'm telling you, my tenant that, if they don't pay us, you're going to have to get out. And she's like, what am I supposed to do? I'm trying to give her as much leeway as I can, but at a certain point, you just have to say, I'm sorry. I got to get somebody in here who can pay. O'Shields said his tenant and he tried to get answers from WCHA. I've spoken with the executive director a couple of times, just told him this is inexcusable, How are you not paying us? O'Shields questioned. Yeah, 5 months. Imagine that, going 5 months without a rent payment. And this is supposed to be a voucher. You're supposed to be getting a housing voucher. Now, I went a couple of months waiting for that very first rent payment from the housing authority, and that was bad enough, okay? And I was just kind of like, this is stupid. But when they did pay me, after that, the money just came and it flowed perfectly. The money flowed perfectly. Now, there were other issues, obviously, right? But that's just one of those little factors of why a lot of landlords don't want to participate. Now, imagine you're a small landlord. You're not a big landlord with hundreds of properties. You own maybe one property, and you're renting it out to a Section 8 tenant who has a housing voucher. And you have a monthly mortgage payment that you must make. Now, you have to make that mortgage payment for 5 months straight. You have to pay that insurance, the taxes, the maintenance while that tenant is staying up in there for 5 months straight. You're $7,000, nearly $7,000 in the hole because they haven't paid you yet. Now, imagine this. You're a small mom and pop, one property, and you're going through this, and you're working overtime. Maybe you went out and got a second job so that you could let this Section 8 tenant live for free? No, we're not a charity here. It's ridiculous. And then they say, well, why don't all landlords want to participate in this program? Here's why. Here's a perfect example of why. Because of these issues. Now, I don't know what to say, but this is common. Okay? This isn't something that is limited to North Carolina or to certain regions. No. Problems with this program are nationwide. And the only thing I can think of is because this program is administered by the government, right? The government is inefficient in every way. They don't have any sort of timeline. They don't give a crap about any of that stuff. The people working for them, if they don't pay the landlords in time, do you think anybody's going to lose their job? Of course not. Okay? Nobody's going to lose their job over this. The only person who's going to suffer is you as the landlord, and the tenant, of course, too, if they get evicted. Now, that's even worse, for them. And they're losing their housing. They did nothing wrong. They thought everything was going to be paid for by this housing authority, and they didn't do it. So, yeah, you're leaving landlords and tenants in limbo. And this is the issue when you have a middleman inserted between the customer and the business. Okay, you have a middleman being the government, throwing rules in there, controlling everything you do, and not allowing the contract to be between the two individuals. So my opinion is, and I've thought this opinion for a while, that Section 8, like the vouchers and all that nonsense, should be just basically eliminated. And instead, the money should be directly paid to the tenant, and then they can pay the landlord directly as though, it was their money. Now, obviously, that method alone will have a lot of flaws due to the fact that it is easy to scam it. And we saw that during the pandemic. Okay, when they were paying the money directly to the tenants weren't using it to pay rent. They were going on vacation and all sorts of nonsense. And, so, no, that is not... It would work better for the landlords in that sort of situation, right? But going back to it, maybe, I don't know, maybe it seems to me that having the government involved in the whole process is what's creating the problems. And there's no way really to get the government out of it without just demanding that everyone pay their own rent. So, yeah, a bad situation overall. O'Shields is not alone. In May, ABC 11 first told you about WCHA not paying landlords for months, forcing tenants like Nancy Powell to look for new housing as her landlord said he couldn't let her continue to live in the rental without payment. Powell said, "I've been to my local housing authority and they don't have answers." After ABC 11 troubleshooter Diane Wilson's involvement, Powell's rent was paid to her landlord. In a follow-up investigation, landlord Zach Hinton is demanding he be paid the more than $9,600 in rent he says he's owed from WCHA for his tenant, who also has a housing voucher. Hinton says it's very unfair to place the blame on the tenant and evict them for something and punish them for something that they haven't done anything wrong, and really believe it's just the agency's fault has failed them. And I agree, okay? And no, it isn't the tenant's fault in this situation. You know, whether I agree with these socialist programs or not, right, they exist and they should be doing the things that they promised that they're going to do, right? But they're not. And we're left in limbo. So we have to do what we have to do. If that means we have to evict that tenant because we're not getting paid, you know, I'm sorry, but you got to go. You can't stay here for free forever on my dime. Okay, anyway, put a comment in the comment section down below and let me know what you think of this whole situation.